Hey, Nick.
Oh. Pretty good. How you doing?
Is my audio okay?
It's really soft.
What F is going on? Because I had that problem last week. I had to edit a ton of audio. It was soft on the Zoom recording, too. I got to fix it. Let me see here.
I've got this Ajax issue that I've been dealing with for like 4 days. I can't find any good documentation, and no matter what combination I try, I can't get it done. Like adding an Ajax function to an autocomplete into the reference field that already exists. Like I can add Ajax no problem to any field, like in a custom form, but I'm trying to do it in a form alter, and it just doesn't fire, no matter what I do.
All right, let me check my audio here. That sucks.
Yeah, it's pretty annoying.
Testing that's not super easy either.
No, definitely not. It's made harder by the fact that the particular set I'm working on gets like, every time we refresh, gets like 50 log messages.
Testing.
The volume doesn't seem to be changing.
I'm trying to change my devices here. Let me see. If I can make it any louder that way. It's pretty frustrating.
You sound softer than you were.
How about now? Is it louder?
It's a little louder. It's about back to where it was.
Makes no sense to me. Hello. Yo, I can see it's wicked soft. What the hell? This is so make sure I'm thinking about this right. So this is actually input, right? This is input. So testing. See if I can turn it off. Hello.
No difference.
Yo. Yeah, I know. I can see that.
Okay.
I'm watching the meter in Zoom, and I can't get it to go up. Why is that? So let's see. Is it that guy? No, hello, that's no different.
That sounded a little bit louder.
Is it louder? Louder.
No.
Louder.
Doesn't seem to be changing now.
No, okay. Gotta be careful that your excitement doesn't
make
it louder. Louder. This seems to actually be making a difference.
Yes.
Is that right now?
Yeah. You're much louder.
It's pegged on my side.
Yeah, you don't sound as loud as normal.
Right.
But you're significantly louder than you were when you get on.
I can see that. There's something wrong. Automatically join over. Let me see. There's some setting I can change. This is. I've got everything pegged. I don't think it's any different. Hello.
That's louder.
Is it louder?
But there's like a buzz now in the background.
Of course. Hello. Because it's. What the hell is wrong with this thing? There's something that is just not right. I don't know what it is. Let me look over here.
Something just changed. Like when you first leaned over, I could hear nothing, and then you said something over here. I could hear it almost like you were in front of the mic. Did you touch anything?
I did. I touched some wires. And I
Yeah,
can hear it different now too.
yeah. There's some distortion now,
There's
but
the,
it's not. But it sounds because it's loud. Maybe there's a bad connection with one of the wires.
there's a wire problem. Yeah, I can now hear the sound in my ear. I couldn't before. So let me see.
Did any of the cables get pinched? Because that was what happened with my camera. My camera would only work half the time. That's why I had to buy a new one.
Is this any different?
Yeah,
Better,
that
right?
sounds normal.
Okay. Yep. I just unplugged everything and reseated everything, and I could hear it in my headphones now, and I couldn't before. So
You might be a little bit loud, but
well, actually, I was hearing it in the local speakers, but it's still louder.
yeah, it sounds
I can hear
normal.
you. Yeah. Right. But it's better.
Yeah, it sounds normal.
Okay, great. Yeah, I can hear it now. So something wasn't seated right in the mixing board. Oh, well, that'll be enjoyable for the people listening ahead of time. 5 minutes of that junk.
I've been looking for an excuse to get like an off-board like audio card or like a mixing board or something. But since I don't really do any mixing, it's hard to justify.
It won't necessarily help anything either if it's just you.
Yeah, that's what like I've been.
It's just a toy.
Every time we walk by them, I look at them. But
all right, let's see. Let me set this to gallery mode. Can you reposition your video camera, Nick? We're getting just your head now. There you go. Thanks. Lumberjack John has joined us. I had to cancel my trip to Paris.
Because coronavirus?
Yeah, we decided yesterday with the Louvre closed and I don't know. I don't want to get there and have stuff be more closed.
Yeah, Jonah is going to the West Coast this weekend. She's been trying to decide if she should cancel too.
Where in the West Coast?
Washington.
Oh. Ground zero.
Yeah.
Come on.
What do you mean? No, 6 people have died.
Yeah.
Yeah, but how many of those people have been like immunocompromised?
Yeah, but the mortality rate of this thing is pretty high right now. The death rate to the number of people infected, unless there's way more than we know about, is extremely high.
Yeah,
I'm fairly certain there's significantly more than we know about. I mean, up until this weekend, there had only been 472 tests done in the U.S.
Right.
Compared to 1.6 million per day in China and 65,000 over a weekend in South Korea. So one of the reasons why our infection rate is so low is because we're not testing it.
So, I mean, I think I don't know. I have mixed feelings. I have mixed feelings about said coronavirus.
I mean, if you look at the mortality rate, which is 2% if hospitals aren't overloaded and 5% if they are.
It depends on your age. It's lower than that if you're under 50.
It's 2% and 5%. And if you look at the expected infection rate, which is 10 to 20% of the population based on the flu, because it's similar has similar infection rates as the flu. So if 20% of the people in the country get it, that's 60 million people. And if you go in the low percent, 2% of those die, even if they're immunocompromised or elderly. That's still 2 million people or 1.5 million people. That's not small numbers.
It's not.
So
I don't disagree with that.
I mean,
John, do you have a mic? Or are you using that headset?
I'm using the headset because my mic's at the office.
Sounds bad.
Is it rubbing? I mean, I can use.
Actually, I don't think you're using it yet. Actually,
I'm not.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah,
I'm using.
Tap
maybe
it.
no, it wasn't being used.
No, it's built. It's no.
Alright.
It should be this. Is it not? This?
It's not.
It's not.
No.
Yeah, what's going on there?
That's probably why it sounds so bad.
Oh no, it is using internal microphone. How do I get it to not use that? Hold on a second.
It's time for you to invest in a second mic, John.
What do you mean? I have a mic.
A second mic, so you have one of the
A second mic.
I mean, they're $50. Come on.
Because half the time you're not on it because you don't have it.
That's not true. Usually I bring it with me. Is that better?
Yeah.
Well, compared to us, where we have it 100% of the time.
Okay. Well, yeah, let's go back to talking about coronavirus.
Well, actually, 1 second before we do that, are we doing our weekly update?
I forgot to add it in. Yeah, sorry. Can you throw it in there? I totally forgot to put that in.
Yeah, so that goes above the stories, right?
Yeah.
Weekly update about what?
Like the weekly update that we do.
Oh.
And I'm reading the second half of the intro?
No, I am. Didn't update that.
Okay. I can. We just don't usually split that up. I used to do that whole thing when I was selling candy bars as a kid for like fundraisers. You know, me and my sister would go door to door selling them. And I'd be like, I'm Nick. And she'd be like, I'm Amanda. Would you like to buy candy bars? I mean, it worked. I mean, we won pretty much every single one we were part of.
Today's weekly update, I'm switching it to how podcasting is like selling candy bars. Today's show.
We got the company to change their policy. I got the company to change their policy one year because it used to be if you sold a certain amount.
How did we get on candy bars?
I was just talking about how like the
scripts
the intro
scripts
you
is
had.
how we got.
Yeah, the script you had you and me.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so we used to try different scripts when we were selling candy bars.
Don't feel bad. It was really tough to keep up with. So did you reschedule your trip, Steve, or did you just bag it all together?
I mean, what does reschedule mean, really? I mean,
do they give you the money back? I assume.
No. So I can't unless France ends up on the warning list,
do not fly list or whatever.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be that high. It just has to be like level 3 or whatever. Then Delta.
When does that?
Then if that happens before my actual flight date, then I can get a refund. If it doesn't happen, then I mean it's my minus $300 change fee. But I then have to use the tickets before the purchase date, which was last December. So I have December to reuse the.
When
does it have to be a comparable?
When was
flight,
your trip?
No, you get credit. So if like these tickets were $1,100 minus the $300, so I have $800 left. If I use it for a $500 trip, I have a $300 credit.
So you could fly out to DrupalCon.
Yeah, right.
When was the trip going to be?
2 weeks.
Oh, okay.
It was going to be the 18th through the 25th.
That sucks. I mean, it's better to be safe.
Yeah, we were on the fence for this, and my wife. I don't feel like I'm going to go there and get sick, but I feel like.
But if everything's closed, it's not going to be.
Yeah, the one thing, the Louvre closing, put the nail in the coffin. But my wife is also nervous about this whole thing. Yeah. So us going there and then being nervous the whole time doesn't sound like a lot of fun either, right?
Yeah, I'm resigned to catching it at some point. I mean, I catch everything, so
It's funny. Laura and I were talking about that this morning. We're like, yeah, like you get it. Like the scary thing though is like those groups, like the kids and the elderly folk. You're just like,
Yeah.
But the thing is, you say that it's like elderly folk, but like a 29-year-old doctor in China died.
but that's bullshit. That's bullshit.
How's that bullshit? He's a doctor. He's 29.
It's
He's
bullshit
healthy.
because now you're feeding into the fear. The reason that guy died is because he was at like ground zero for this thing, and his viral count was like 5 to 10 times higher than anybody else. The average person that gets this is potentially not going to die from it if they're healthy and they don't have some other pre-existing condition. So like to go around and be like, a doctor in China died from this. Yes, he did die from it, but he was also immersed in the virus. Like there, when your viral load is that high, it's hard for your body to fight off anything.
Okay.
On another note, I find that name,
I will not subscribe to fear mongering.
Hey, I wasn't fear mongering. I just said that somebody our age died too.
Being cautious and is not the same as fear mongering. It's not.
Yeah, I object to the term.
Going to Costco and spending $800 on supplies is fear mongering.
Well, or capitalism, depending on how you want what you do with those supplies.
I bought every single mask in a 10-mile radius.
Don't do that either.
I'm just kidding.
The masks are only for people that are already sick.
That's what they want you to believe.
Oh my God! Stop it! Stop. We gotta talk about Drupal because
did you wait? On another note, that there was a reporter in Colombia that my wife showed me the video. He was on TV showing people how to wear the masks, and he didn't know how to put them on.
So
he put it on over his head, like vertically. And the person was like, "You have that on wrong. You need to take it off and put it on right. You're showing people how to use these." And so he had to take it back off over his head and put it back like the correct way.
Absolutely ridiculous because like the N95 mask should really only be used by like health professionals that are like that doctor in China that are immersed in illness, right?
I mean, one of the problems is even if you have those, the cartridges only last for 30 minutes. People don't realize that it's not like, hey, you put it on, you wear it all day and you're okay. Like it has to be a perfect seal and you have to change the cartridge every 30 minutes.
And that's the other part. It has to be a perfect seal. So like somebody with facial hair can't wear that mask. They have to shave, right, in order to wear the mask. Because
if it's going to protect my life, I think I could shave my goatee.
Well, right. Yeah. No, well, that's not what I'm saying. Like obviously if you're going somewhere where you're going to be exposed to it like a bunch of times, you're going to do that. But like, I think the more important thing here is like, hey, if you're sick, like go get one of those the cheap masks that 3M is now mass producing because the country needs them, and put it on and wear it, and don't get your droplets all over surfaces that people are touching.
There's 2 cases in Providence. I don't know if you guys knew that. So I started using this website because the CDC website keeps taking information.
Yeah, so those people who went to Italy, they were all on the same trip from St. Ralph's, I think it was, or St. Ray's Academy. Yeah, so they all went on a trip to Italy, and they came back with coronavirus.
Yeah.
Yep. Good times to be alive.
Yeah.
So I'd suggest everyone go out and rent Contagion. It's a good film.
So funny you say that, because I don't know, were we talking about this, or maybe we were talking about it at the office, but somebody was saying that on Netflix, the Netflix recommended movies, like once the coronavirus started breaking out in China, like
it was on Amazon too.
Contagion and some other movie, some other movie about viruses and stuff, started exploding, and that was all you were seeing.
Yeah, I'll watch it.
It's actually a pretty good movie. I watched it years ago, and then I rented it again the other night just to just to increase the hype and increase the panic in the house.
I like the fact that literally, if you look at Providence, Rhode Island, right, there are 2 confirmed cases, 2 existing cases. Nobody's died and nobody's recovered.
Well, I mean, only
2 people's pretty good.
I mean, 6 people in the country.
So what was interesting is on Sunday, right? The news came out in the news that there was someone from Providence or from Rhode Island that was infected, and there was going to be a press conference at noontime. So we put on the TV, watched at noontime. They gave no details about like who this person was. They were hesitant to say it was a male or female. They didn't say it was a school trip.
That makes sense, though.
They said nothing. But hang on. They said nothing. And then within 45 minutes after the press conference was over, it was all over the news. Who it was, what the conditions were, a school trip. I mean, so they knew the information.
Yeah, but you don't want to.
They're trying to prevent panic, right?
But when you don't give any information, but it's all over the news, like within 60 minutes, that just makes you look bad at that
just
point.
goes back to the media. Media is not the greatest thing in the world. Like once the media gets a hold of something, they have a way of sensationalizing it that can be have quite the adverse effect.
Yeah, I'm just curious what the real infection rate is in the U.S. because they're getting multiple community spreads that have no known contact with people that traveled or were sick.
Right.
And so we know that it's significantly higher. I mean, it's the United States. We should be able to test more than 400 people in a 3-week period.
Well, they're also so the CDC is sending out other kits to other centers to be able to test more readily.
Well, yeah, but the kit that they're sending is invalid because it only tests for coronavirus, not this specific strain. So it's giving a really high false positive rate. And they're also, until I think last Saturday, they weren't allowing states or hospitals to prepare their own tests, which in the past, especially in this type of case, would be allowed. So like California had a test pretty much ready to go. Or like even South Korea, like we could go to South Korea and be like, hey, that test that you've got, can you kind of tell us how you're doing it? And that hasn't been done yet either, which, I feel would be a pretty important step. So I don't know. Well, I mean, we'll get through it. I'm just curious to see, how this is going to.
Or will we?
Oh, we will. Now who's fear mongering?
I mean, there's a 50-50 chance. It's fine.
Let's record the show. All right.
Okay. You gotta bring up
we're already at 1:15.
You should retitle the show Roles and Permissions and Fear Mongering.
I don't know what I'm going to update on. I know. Okay.
Now you don't want to update on coronavirus?
No, don't want to go there and here. All right. Let's roll here. It's me. That's right.
Welcome to the show.
Just reread this quick. All right. Still recording. Everything's good. This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 239, Roles and Permissions in Drupal 8. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Back in episode 20, in October 2013, we talked about roles and permissions. It was like a primer on the basic concepts of the modules we use. And that was back in Drupal 7. Today, we're going to revisit that topic and talk about Drupal 8. So before we do that, welcome back to the show. Nick Laughlin, what's new with you?
Good afternoon. What's new with me? Not too much. Valve, which is a pretty popular video game company, is coming out with their newest flagship game called Half-Life Alyx. Half-Life is one of my favorite games, so I'm pretty excited about it. It's a VR game, and Valve also has their own VR kit called the Valve Index. And I think I talked about this in one of my updates a couple months ago. I had a chance to, play with Valve Index in a game, I think around New Year's. And so I've been on the hunt to pick one up. And they're still on back order. They've been on back order for 4 months. So the game's supposed to come out in 2 weeks, and I've resigned myself to the fact that I likely won't have an index before the game actually comes out. But I'll be picking one up if they ever start selling them again. I'm looking forward to checking out that game. I think the IGN came out with some gameplay today. So it's like a 5 or 10 minute video that shows what it's like, and it's pretty interesting how they solve certain things like walking. Typically in a game, you have a keyboard or a controller, and you just kind of walk with that. But this has a couple of ways to move around without actually just walking and bumping into walls and things. So it's pretty interesting to see how they're solving some of these issues. Looking forward to hopefully getting my hands on an index to check it out for myself.
Did you build a new computer yet for that?
No. What I ended up doing is I spec'd out a new computer for it, and I decided that VR is different enough that I'm not sure it's something I'll actually enjoy. And so I decided what I'll do is I'll get the index. My computer that I use for development is powerful enough to run it, albeit not on top settings. And so I figured I'd get that, try out a few games, and make sure it's something that I'm actually that I actually enjoy. And if I do, I'll build a VR specific computer for it. There was a forum that helped me put one together. And it wasn't too pricey. And then if I decide that, it gives me motion sickness or something that I don't enjoy, I'll just sell the Valve Index. I'm sure the secondary market's pretty big, considering I've been waiting for 4 to 6 months to pick one up, and they're still on back order.
So just a question about the game you're excited about, Half-Life. Is that a continuation of the Half-Life game that was out on like PlayStation, Xbox, and all that stuff, like in the 90s, I think it was?
That was a computer game, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a computer game. I don't think it ever came out on console. It is. It's actually funny. There's an ongoing kind of joke on the internet that Valve can't make the third version of any game. They've got Half-Life, Half-Life 2, Half-Life 2 Episode 1, Half-Life 2 Episode 2, Portal 2, Left 4 Dead, Left 4 Dead 2. They literally don't have any game that gets to the third version. And so maybe a year ago, they finally came out and announced and said, hey, we're never making Half-Life 3.
So I would just like to fact check you on the fact that Half-Life has been available for Microsoft Windows, Mac OS, Linux, Xbox 360, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, and the Shield Portable, whatever that might be.
Huh. It's an NVIDIA game system. I didn't realize that they came out on console. So they announced maybe a year ago that Half-Life 3 just wasn't going to happen. Stop getting your hopes up for it. And then 6 months after that, they said, hey, there's a new game called Half-Life Alyx. So we're getting the continuation of the story. They're continuing their tradition of not ever coming out with a third of any game. But their games are always groundbreaking. I'm really looking forward to it if I can ever get the controller.
If you'd like to read more, dear listeners, we'll put a link to the Wikipedia page in the show notes.
It's great. John, what's up with you?
So lately I've actually been working on something kind of interesting in the realm of search. If you've listened to the show, clearly I'm a super big fan of Solr and using Solr as a search backend for Drupal. But recently we've had the opportunity to work with a different search backend called Algolia. And we haven't actually built the search mechanism yet, but we're in kind of the preliminary stages of kind of playing with Algolia to see what it can do kind of out of the box. So the way Algolia works is it's a paid service that has integration with Drupal. It works with Search API. However, it only indexes with Search API. The front end and the mechanism that you're using to power your search is actually JavaScript based. So, that provides a little bit of flexibility on your front end, also makes it super fast. And that's one of the things that we were looking at when we were considering whether we go Solar, whether we go Algolia. Algolia is super fast on the front end. Also, Algolia gives you a pretty cool dashboard with a lot of reporting on how people are searching and terms that are most popular, so on and so forth. So jumping into that and getting acquainted with that has been pretty interesting.
John, is the service, are you installing software on your server for the indexing?
No,
Or is it-
so that's the great part is that it works with Search API. So you install Search API, and then the Search API Algolia module allows you to make that connection to their service and allows for indexing of the site.
So the indexing is done through a cloud service.
Yeah, so my understanding is that Drupal is pushing the information into Algolia.
Interesting. I mean, ties a little bit back to our episode last week when we were talking about things going down. That adds another dependency of where your website could have some downtime, right?
Yep,
Angolia goes down, your search goes down.
Yeah, Algolia being a third-party service, definitely. However, that being said, there could be an issue with Solar too. There have been instances that we've had in the past where certain vendors' Solar instances have just gone away, and
Sure.
it's the same thing, same sort of problem.
Interesting.
What about you, Steven? What have you been working on?
So I'm going to tie into Nick's gaming thing a little bit. So last couple of episodes, we've talked about Nick's Mario Brothers game that he put out on the Nintendo Switch. I've been thinking about getting one for a while and decided last week I was going to pull the trigger. So I went online looking for my best deal. And as you learn, there's no deals for Nintendo Switch. It's basically $2.99 no matter where you go. But what was interesting was, this was over the weekend I did this. I couldn't find one. Best Buy didn't have any. Target didn't have any. And I was like, oh, that's weird. So then I thought to myself, does this have anything to do with production coming out of China? So I did a Google search, and sure enough, about 3 weeks ago, there were some articles that came out that said, hey, by the way, because of the coronavirus, you should probably start seeing shortages of Nintendo Switches. So I thought that was interesting. So I could not actually find one when I was ready to buy one. I think I could have got a used one at GameStop. And maybe it was just, there was a Nintendo Switch run last week, like there was on hand sanitizer and water and everything else with the coronavirus running around here. But I'm guessing it has something to do with the production. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
I have a question.
Yep.
You said the Switch was how much? $2.99?
Yeah.
Okay, so why not just order it from Amazon? Apparently, you can get it by Friday on Amazon for $2.99.
Yeah, I could do that. Yep. But
okay.
When you're like ready,
you
to
wanted
get it,
instant gratification.
I wanted to drive for 15 minutes, get one, and plug it in and use it.
Got it. Okay. All right.
So since then, the urge to get it has left my body, and maybe it will come back in the future.
Oh, all right. Well, look at that. Coronavirus saved you $300.
It did. All right. So let's move on to our stories of the week. Got a few things listed here. The first one is there's been a series of articles, and it's hard to call it a series, but Lullabot recently posted an article about how to get your Drupal 7 site to a static website. There's a blog post they have. We'll link to it in the show notes. I'm calling it a series because they actually reference an article that they recently refreshed but wrote many years ago on how to prepare your site to turn into a static website. So the combination of these two articles together is a really great reference for someone who wants to take their Drupal 7 website and put it into maybe a static state because you're rebuilding it in Drupal 8 and you want to have it available somewhere. So with these two articles, we've recently on the show been talking about Tome. That's a Drupal 8 solution. But this is like a Drupal 7 strategy. So the links are in the show notes, something for you to look at.
Sorry, I'm laughing because while you're talking about this, I'm suddenly like building like in my head a likeness to this of like estate planning for older folks.
Yeah.
like up here's what you're gonna need to do in order to get your affairs in order before
before the Drupal 9 rolls out. Right.
Yeah.
For end of life. Yeah, it is kind of an end of life planning, right?
Right. All right. It's morbid. It's morbid this week on Talking Drupal.
The next article I want to point out is we've talked almost every single week or every other week for the past few months about Drupal 9. And Hook 42 had a blog post out in the past week that put some numbers around the things that we're talking about. These numbers are about a week old, and I just thought they were fascinating. I wanted to share them. Again, the link's in the show notes. But did you guys take a look at these numbers here at all? I thought they were really interesting, especially when it came to the number of Drupal 7 versus Drupal 8 sites that are.
Well, the thing that stood out to me is the built width showing 300 sites still using Drupal 4.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you go back to the older versions. Yeah,
who they are and why those are still up.
Right.
Hey, I mean, they still work.
Maybe for some definition of work, but they work until somebody finds them. I can't imagine that they're secure in any sense of the word. But no, I actually read through the whole article. I thought it was interesting. The numbers you're pointing out is that Drupal 7 has twice as many websites as Drupal 8, I think, more than twice as many. And I think there's a few reasons for that. I think one is Drupal 7 is still supported and was supported for a very long time. I mean, I think Drupal 7's high was about 1 million or so. I think the second thing is, and this second is there's a lot of assumptions here. I think fewer people use the update module, which is what updates Drupal.org statistics, because you use Composer to update stuff. I still use update a fair amount just to be notified when something needs an update, but a lot of people use update to actually, manage.
So your point being that these numbers could be skewed because of people not using the reporting.
Yeah, that's possible.
I mean, I would venture to say the numbers are skewed more because people are waiting. They have a Drupal 7 site and they're waiting for Drupal 9, right? So like they're looking at
really. You think people are waiting for Drupal 9? I mean, Drupal 8's been here for what, since 2000? When?
But think about
15,
it for a second. If you're
16.
You're a company or you're a business owner and you're like, hey, I can spend this money on Drupal 8 and then like, it's an easier path to Drupal 9, or I can just hold on to my Drupal 7 site that works perfectly fine for now and then just pay the money to upgrade to Drupal 9 down the road. Like that's a little bit of a no-brainer, especially if there are companies out there that are still supporting the Drupal 7 site and like, keep adding new features or adding new functionality. So
I mean, that's the thing to keep in mind. I mean, Drupal 7 is still supported and still works. And so a lot of these people are just not updating. They don't update until something gets end of life. And it used to be the conventional wisdom was you upgrade every 2 versions of Drupal, right? Like people went from 5 to 7, people went from 6 to 8. And so a lot of people are doing the same thing with 7. I think that's once 9 comes out and 7 is end of life, I think that will probably change. If the upgrade path from 8.x to 9 is as easy as it's supposed to be, people will just upgrade. But when it's a massive rewrite, people are just going to not do that. I think that's one of the reasons why the change to the Drupal lifecycle was so important. I mean, if people can just continually upgrade, we'll see a consolidation. Even though, if we go to Drupal 10, Drupal 9 is still supported. If people can just upgrade it and get the newest features, people will do that. if it's not painful and doesn't require a major rewrite of everything. And that means that modules will, the newest version will get more support. I think it's overall, I think that's one of the best things that Drupal has done in a very long time.
So there's two other numbers I want to point out here quick. One is the contributed projects for Drupal 9. The counts are 788 have open issues with Drupal 9, and 738 have things that are fixed and closed. So it's about half and half. And almost the same ratio with core issues. There are 447 open issues and 566 fixed and closed. So there is progress, but June is so close that feels like it's not nearly where it needs to be, right?
Well, so I wonder if we should clarify that, or if it needs clarification, right? 447 open core issues doesn't mean that those are 477 issues that need to be resolved before Drupal 9 can be released, right? So of that 447, like how many of those are blocking issues that are blocking the release of Drupal 9?
I don't know. Did they specify that in the? I don't remember them specifying that in the article. If they were blockers or not, yeah. So go do your homework. Read the article. You can get some more info, some interesting numbers.
And if you have a Drupal 4 site, reach out. We'd love to get you up to Drupal
interview
8 or 9. Surprising.
So the last, well, maybe not the last, but the last story this week is related to VS Code. So a couple of weeks ago, I finally pulled the trigger, made the switch from IntelliJ's IDE to VS Code, and I'm slowly remembering why I switched back to my old IDE. There's a bunch of little paper cuts that really just kind of annoy me about VS Code. And I've found a lot, most of them are just a setting that need to be changed. There's still a couple I haven't worked through, but one of the ones that I fixed this past week is in VS Code, if you single click on a file, it opens it up in a preview mode. And if you don't make a change to it, if you click on a different file, it closes the previous file. And I found that annoying for so many reasons, but specifically if I'm writing some new functionality and I'm reviewing it, how another module does it, or I'm looking at their permissions YAML file or something like that, I'll click on it, it opens, then I'll click on, my file to make the necessary changes and compare it, and it closes the file. There's a setting that you can change to disable previews, and then single click just opens the file and it stays open until you close it.
I just learned something. I had no idea that VS Code was doing that. I see it now. So when I click a file once, it opens a file in a tab, and the name of the file is italicized.
Yep.
Which I guess means it's in preview mode. And then if I click another file, it replaces it. So the double click opens it permanently.
Or if you make a change in a preview.
Okay, yeah, then it switches to a permanently open.
That's super odd, because I do not see the same functionality. What are you just doing it from the Explorer on the left-hand side?
Yeah. If you single click on
it must be a Linux thing.
It might be.
It's a VS Code thing.
I don't know that I've ever changed that setting.
But it's, if you have a default VS Code settings file that's part of projects that other people put in, that could have changed it for this particular project too. But it's something that
I actually find it as a very handy feature now that I know it's there. Like now that I know that it's working, I can see how useful that is when you're just kind of looking at something quick. You don't want it to take up a lot of your tabs. So if I just single click them, I can go through them quickly.
So,
but I find that so often I'm like quickly opening something and I need to compare it with something, and as soon as you click away, it just
double click it.
Well, but then I have to remember to double click. I've got used to just single click. I mean, IntelliJ, you just click on it once and it opens. Although the funny thing is, not 10 minutes after I finished changing this, I was looking for some particular functionality in a module I think a chart module. And so I clicked on maybe 20 different files to find the specific logic that I was looking for. And I was like, okay, great. Now I need to find my file that I'm editing. And I had like 25 files open. I was like, wow, this is kind of annoying.
We should do a show on VS Code, using VS Code, because I think it's interesting. I use workspaces quite a bit, and like basically have all of my files. Like I have 3 panes for files, and then like all of them are combined into one workspace for like each project. So I switch between workspaces all the time, which opens a whole bunch of different files.
I don't use workspaces, and I know that I'd probably like it, but a couple of times when I've tried to spend like 5 minutes like understanding it, I like don't understand it, and then I like just get back to my work.
Well, if you want like a quick 15-minute tutorial, I would be more than happy to show you at least how I'm using it, and you can go from there. But
I mean, for our listeners, the 2 things that are still currently really annoying me with VS Code that I haven't found a way to fix. One is the terminal. There's no way to have it open the terminal by default. Like when I open VS Code, I want the terminal to be open in the project root 100% of the time.
You should try it. Are you using workspaces? I wonder if it would stay open in a workspace if you have it open.
I may test that.
I also don't use the terminal in VS Code, but that's just me.
I always use the terminal built into the IDE because you just know that it's in the right place. Like you don't have to find which tab in the terminal you're in. Like it's just there. The second thing that really drives me bonkers is every single time I open it, it gives me like 3 or 4 notifications in the bottom right-hand corner blocking, it seems, specifically whatever I need. Like it's telling me there's no executable PHP available. I use Lando, so I don't need one. And it tells me that there's an update available.
I don't even see them anymore. I know they're there, but
the only one I ever get is like, hey, the settings.php file needs to be overwritten. Do you want to overwrite it? Yes, overwrite it. Okay.
But I just want those, and they just don't go away.
You want them to take up the whole screen. I understand.
I just want them either to disappear after like a second or 2 or not be where they are.
If they disappear and you're not looking at them, though, how are you going to know there's a problem?
There isn't a problem. They've never shown me something that wasn't working that I needed to take action on. It's always, hey, PHP isn't available.
Moving right along.
So one of the things that I learned as I made my switch over the last few years from Mac to Linux is that I can't always expect things to work the way I would perfectly want them to. So I've kind of moved into a mode of I just go with the flow with the software that I'm using. And I know that it's never exactly going to be what I want, and it's never going to be the same as the other thing that I used on the other platform. And I've gotten very tolerant to that kind of
thing. And that's one of the reasons why I finally switched to like these little paper cuts aren't big enough to. I mean, the IDE I was using before, the license is permanent, but it's from 2016, and so it's just clunky. It locks up a lot of the times. It uses way more resources.
I imagine that Nick is going to spend time creating a plugin for VS Code to move the notifications to somewhere more.
That's right.
There's an experimental plugin already. It just doesn't work. So maybe I can contribute to that rather than creating my own. But
open source IDEs coming to a computer.
No, I'm a fan. It's so much faster. It's just those 2 minor issues. The thing that kind of confused me for a little while, that is what kind of opened my eyes to how configurable it is that by default, it doesn't recognize PHP variables as variables. And so you double click on the variable and it would copy everything except for the $sign. And like,
I guess it would do that if you didn't have some of the extensions installed initially.
Well, no, because I had the PHP language extension, but what I had to do is I had to go into the variable detector language and cut out add a $sign, and then it started working.
I don't remember seeing that issue.
Maybe it's the version I'm using. I don't know. There's been about a half a dozen things like this that I had to tweak. I'm pretty happy with it now. Like I said, it's so much faster. the only two things are the ones that I mentioned: the terminals not being open and the notifications. But it's a great IDE. I'm overall pretty happy with it.
So how about if we move on, considering that we're coming close to the end of our recording time, to our primary topic. So back in episode 20, we did a show on roles and permissions. I think in the future, we're going to do some of these shows where we kind of go back to some basic concepts every once in a while, just to give for maybe new listeners or even old listeners from episode 20, just get maybe a refresher on some of the basic things that we do every day in Drupal. And today we're going to be talking about the roles and permissions. The last show was 2013, guys. That was a long time
October of 2013, 7 years ago.
Yeah, 7 years ago. So it was Drupal 7 focused. So today we'll start off with, hey, what are some basics about roles and permissions? And then move into some use cases on when the core functionality that comes with Drupal isn't sufficient and you move to contributed modules, and maybe what are some of the modules that you're using for what kinds of things right now. So let's start with what do you get out of the box? Drupal gives you roles and permissions. Do you guys find that you tinker a lot with roles and permissions? Or do you kind of leave them as is? And what are they to start with?
So I think it depends. It depends on the project, but out of the box, Drupal has a few default permission or default roles that you get. Logged in user, authenticated user is one, administrator is one, and then
Anonymous.
Anonymous is the third one.
Well, there's also the hidden super admin user one role, which isn't accessible that you can give to people, but it gets some special permissions.
So that's interesting. So I know administrator was kind of like that role for. I knew like in Drupal 8 they added the administrator. They have the administrator role, and that kind of has a top level. So you're saying that there's the first user you create still has the ability, as it did in Drupal 7, to have additional permissions that aren't overly obvious.
You know what? Now that you're calling that out, I'm wondering if that's just an assumption that I pulled over from Drupal 7 or not. I think it still does get some permissions out of the box, but
it wasn't role based in 7. It was user ID based.
Yeah, it was user ID based, which is why a lot of people disable user one. But I'm not sure about that actually. I'll have to do some research. But as far as I'm aware,
our first follow up.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware,
and John's guessing the answer is no. There are no special rules for user one, right?
Yeah. That's my inclination. Is that in Drupal 8 they added the administrator role, and that role was kind of had the power of the administrator, and you could give that to multiple users. But going back to roles and permissions, so out of the box you get a couple of roles with Drupal already pre-configured. The main thing to think about with roles and permissions, like what do you get out of the box? What are roles? What are permissions? Roles are essentially a group of permissions that you can assign to a user. So Nick's user could be an administrator, as where Steve's user could just be an authenticated user. And the difference between those are the level of permission that it has. So, an administrator in Drupal 8 has seemingly full permission to the site, meaning on the permission screen, everything for that role is enabled. As where an authenticated user has less permission to do things on the site. But Steve's original question was, how often do you go with what comes out of the box with Drupal versus, creating additional roles? And I would say almost 100% of the time, we are creating roles, but the extent of those roles and how many additional roles we're creating varies depending on the type of site that we're creating. So, if you have a pretty basic marketing site where the administrator, the content editors are going to be the people that are editing content and maintaining the site and that sort of thing. We may just create one role for those people, called web admin, and that might be it. Versus something like an e-commerce site where you may have different roles that you want for customers versus certain users that can log in and see special deals, use special coupon codes. So in my experience, it varies drastically on how many roles you have in your site.
So a couple of points I want to make. One is that your permissions are always assigned to roles, not people. And it becomes important as you start to work on a site, maintain a site, and because you'll have scenarios that come up that say, you know what, no one has the ability to delete things, but I want to give John the permission to be able to delete articles. He's the only one in the organization. You can't go and say John just gets delete permissions. But what you have to do is now create a new role that is delete articles and assign that to John. So it can get very hairy if you don't do like some pre-planning on roles and permissions, and getting into a situation where you're like creating roles that are specific for people and like to give special functions. Usually down the road, that's going to cause you a headache in some way.
Yeah. So one of our points here is when setting up roles, like, are you going to have level-based roles or are you going to have task-based roles? So, Steve's point about a task-based role would be, I want to be able to delete this type of content. Whereas as far as like a level-based role is like, hey, this person is at a level where I think they're going to make good decisions and they have a maybe broader level of access to the site that allows them to do more things. So, yeah, I mean, fair to say, Steve, that you can have a combination of both, where you have level based, and then maybe you have the ability to add some task based permissions at certain points.
I think in the real world, that's where you always end up.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that's definitely true. I tend to call them different things in task versus level based. I call them add-on roles versus comprehensive roles. And the only difference there is an add-on role is something that's kind of like a one-off thing that you need to give to some people. So on a lot of sites, for example, that might be a form editor. So if you have a site that has web forms, only certain people would probably need access to those results. And so rather than giving that to a bunch of different roles, you have a specific role just for that. Comprehensive roles, though, are roles kind of like what John described as level-based. Comprehensive roles will have duplicate permissions to other comprehensive roles sometimes. There maybe one type needs to be able to edit and delete 2 different types of content, and another one needs to be able to edit 3 different types of content. So rather than creating a role for each content type, you have one role that can manage 2 of them and one role that can manage 3 of them, whether or not they overlap. There's pros and cons to both of them. I mean, the pros for the add-on or task-based role is you can get very granular with permission. The con is that you end up with a large number of roles, both in your list of roles and sometimes for a specific user. You can easily end up with a user that has 10 roles if everything is a task-based role. For comprehensive roles, there's pros and cons there as well. The pros are generally there's fewer roles per person, so it's easier to see what they have permission for, what they should have access to. But then again, each individual comprehensive role typically has a fair amount of duplication with other roles. And I think you're right. Which one is right depends on the particular project. I find though that usually most sites have a couple of each. Like usually, I think the average site I work on, aside from the default roles, there's probably 3 to 5 roles that are created for the site. Um, the exception tends to be a, a heavily workflow based content. So if somebody's using Workbench, and they need to go through legal review or medical review for content or something like that, and they have, or they're an editorial, a newspaper or something where they need to, each piece of content has to go through multiple levels of review. Those organizations tend to have 10, 20, 30, I've seen upwards of 50 to 100 roles for those types of organizations. It can get very, very complex and very messy very quickly.
So when you get started, not when you get started, but whenever you add a new module to your site, the module can add new permissions to your permission profile. So if you're adding modules, you should always go back and take a look at what permissions have been updated or added since that module was put in, to make sure that you're covering your roles and permissions for that module properly. So out of the box, I mean, I think it's one of the strengths of Drupal, right? Is that it's got very strong roles and permissions. And it covers probably 80% of what you need to do, but there is that period of time where there's additional stuff that needs to be done. So let's talk about a few of those use cases where you need to go outside of the core modules to cover some of the permissions.
Yeah, I think I was just going to say, I think the 3 areas that kind of have a little, like you need a little bit more granularity, are sometimes around creating users, around content permissions, and field level permissions. And so the first one, one of the issues with Drupal from a security perspective has always been, you create all these roles that say, hey, these users can perform these particular actions. However, if you have an organization where they need to be able to create their own users, they have hundreds of users, and you're not a developer, and the people creating those users always aren't trusted users. If you give somebody the permission to create a user, they can assign whatever role they want to that user. So in essence, they could create a new user with administrative capabilities, and then now they have access to stuff that they shouldn't have access to. Either the person they gave it to, or if they created their own account themselves. And so that can be a pretty big security flaw, giving people access to stuff that they're not supposed to have. So there's a module called Role Assign, and that module just basically restricts which specific roles can assign when they're creating a user. So you could say, for example, a senior editor, when they're creating a user, is only allowed to create users with the role of editor or content reviewer, or less. So they wouldn't be able to assign an admin. And so it's a good way to allow clients flexibility and autonomy with creating users without having to worry about them either inadvertently or on purpose elevating permissions of somebody unintentionally.
Yeah, I use that one all the time. I assign it, or I install it on pretty much every site that we build, because it's kind of a fundamental thing that a web admin or a site contributor is going to need to create user accounts and be able to assign them a certain role, or in as we talked about before, a task-based permission. Like, oh, I want Bill to be able to now delete this content type. Well, going in and assigning those roles is super important.
So I got a general question before we move on to the next one is, given that administrator role is the highest level of authority in Drupal, outside of that user one thing we talked about earlier, do you generally keep that administration role to people in your organization? And do you create something different that you give to customers to get access to?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So my process for that is typically the administrator is somebody, somebody on our team who is, super familiar, super user of Drupal, very familiar with what they're doing. And then, client users are typically given like a web admin. And it's for two reasons. It's not so much because I don't trust the clients to make the right decision, but it also, having that having a smaller set of permissions cleans up the admin quite a bit to things that they don't necessarily need to know about. For example, like content type creation or
Defining your solar configuration.
exactly. Yeah, right. Exactly. So, roles, as much as they are to kind of protect certain parts of the site, they also can give you the ability to clean the admin up a little bit, make it more usable for the people that are using it. So in that same vein, going on to our next module here. So in Drupal, as Nick kind of described earlier, you have to open up permissions pretty broadly in order for certain for users that did not create a piece of content to be able to see unpublished content. So, example, I create a piece of content, I unpublish it. Steve goes in with his user and tries to see that piece of content. He's not going to be able to. That unpublished piece of content is only available to my user or an administrator because they have kind of a higher level of permission. Well, the view unpublished module alleviates that. It gives you the ability to basically assign a permission to be able to view unpublished content, which is great for content editors that need to be able to see unpublished content, so on and so forth. So that's another one that I think I install on almost every site.
Yeah, there's one of the problems with Drupal still with permissions is anything that relates to administering content, like adding a menu, adding a path, publishing or unpublishing, viewing, unpublishing, those aren't really well broken out. There's just a catch-all administer content permission that controls all that stuff. So something that I typically install on sites is published content as well. That gives users the ability to publish and unpublish content without without needing the administer content permission. It also gives you a nicer interface, so you can do it directly from viewing an unpublished piece of content. You don't have to edit, check the box. There's just a tab that says publish or unpublish. It also gives you a nice views integration to publish and unpublished content.
The last, this is not the last one. I was going to say the last one we have listed today, but we got one more after this.
I keep adding them because I keep thinking of new modules. So
yeah.
This show could go on forever.
That's a good point, is that this is not an exhaustive list. This is like the ones that we find very common and use often.
The ones we found
probably many more. Yeah, the ones we found this week that we use this week, right? The next one is field-based permissions. This allows you to define at the role level. Is it the user level too in this one?
No, it's role-based.
Is it just role? Okay.
Yeah. It's role-based as well as creator. So the person who created the content can...
Right, yeah, okay, right. I knew there was something to do with the actual user itself. So it allows you to define at the field level who can view or put content or edit content into a particular field, which could be really handy on a particular view, or it works on any entity. It's not even just node based. So it gives you real granular control with fields on a particular form or display.
Any field, and this kind of goes into as Steve was saying, our list is not exhaustive, but like there are a lot of modules like field permissions that extend the granularity of the permission system quite a bit. So I know we've used this module in the past to be able to, specifically on a commerce site, show a field and allow a certain role to see and edit a field, and then allow another role just to see the field, and
not edit it. Yeah.
And then another role that just couldn't see the field at all. So This gives you a lot of granularity on those permissions. And actually works pretty well. Along those same lines, again, for use with commerce, or you could find another use case, is the registration role. So by default, Drupal, when you create a user, I believe just gives it the authenticated user role. Doesn't really assign it anything other than that. It's a responsibility of the admin to assign the role after that. Well, the registration role module allows you to kind of bypass, not bypass, but resolves that issue for you. It will allow you to assign a role to registrations as they come in. So the way we're using this in commerce is on the checkout process on some commerce sites, you have the ability to create a user account. Well, when you create that user account, this module assigns that account the customer role. So now that user has the ability to log in, and when they log in, they can see previous order information, payment methods, so on and so forth. You could also use this for like an event registration and say, if you register on the site, you're a attendee, and the attendee role can see sessions that we're registered for, and trainings that I've signed up for, so on and so forth. So I think that that's pretty useful in a lot of different use cases.
So someone put in the show notes here a question: do you give admin theme permissions?
So
what are you getting at there?
We set an admin theme, but right. I'm not really sure what the question is here as far as like,
Who put that question in?
Are we allowing admins to change the theme?
Nick, you muted.
You got to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I was muted. So I put that question in because depending on the project that I work on, this is a contentious permission. So you can set an admin theme, but there's also a specific permission to give people access to it. Right.
So when you're editing content or
correct.
You're on an admin page, do they see the admin theme or do they see their site theme?
Exactly. So I'm curious
about it.
So some projects, they're adamant that there's an admin theme for admin tasks, and some projects people are adamant that everything should be done in the basic site theme. I'm curious if you guys.
I can't say I've ever had a client argue with me about what the admin theme looks like, or whether they should see something in the admin theme versus the site.
Well,
other than the scenario I just talked about, where a user is like an e-commerce user or something where they're logging in, and in which case then those pages should be using the site theme. So.
Well, you got to remember, a lot of my clients are agencies, so they have opinions about parts of Drupal that most direct clients aren't going to have access to. But I have some clients that insist that every single page that their client see is in the base theme, whatever the front end theme is. I personally give access to the admin theme. One thing to consider though is, if there's an issue on the front end, it's very easy to fix because you always have a custom theme, especially in Drupal 8. And so you have a way to update that. The admin theme, I only have, I think, one site where we've created a custom admin theme. So if there's something that the customer wants customization on, usually it's a much bigger deal to tweak that.
So I will say in that regard, we have created a child theme of one of the core themes and tweaked like maybe one or two things. There was some issue where something wasn't displaying correctly, so we did create a child theme and added that one line of CSS to adjust that. But I would say typically for content editors, we're giving them the admin theme, and then as I said, if you're doing like commerce, when a customer comes in and they're looking at their saved addresses or something like that, they're seeing the site's theme.
Yeah, sure.
I think it depends on use case. I would argue with your agency client that the admin should be seeing an admin theme, so that way they know that they're in the admin. But we don't have to go there.
I think the last thing that I think is worth mentioning is the change in how permissions are defined. It used to be that there was hook permissions, and that's just changed to a permissions YAML file. It's pretty straightforward, and it's pretty easy to create permissions. The really nice thing, the thing I like about this new kind of layout is it's very easy to see what permissions are available. You don't have to hunt through the .module
It's way
file to
easier.
see
Right. Yep.
if there's a hook permissions defined. If there's a permissions YAML, you can just look at that and see everything that's defined. Pretty big fan of it.
Interesting. I actually didn't realize that was the thing. So now I know where to look if I need those permissions. So if you're a listener and you have questions or you'd like to suggest a role or permission module we should be looking at, you can reach out to us on Twitter at Talking Drupal or email us at show@talkingdrupal.com. You can get updates on the show by signing up for our newsletter. You can do that at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And I'd like to take a moment to thank the patrons for supporting Talking Drupal every single month. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing the Become a Patron button. And if you're interested in hearing our mic checks for the 5 to 10 minutes before the show, becoming a patron is the best way to do that. We also
Sounds so interesting.
we also have discussions about current events sometimes, and a little bit of pre-show planning. So if you want to kind of see what we're talking about before the show.
What's that old saying? If you want to see how the sausage is made.
Yeah, right. All right. Well, thanks for joining us again this week. Nick, where can people find you?
You can find me online pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, NICXVAN.
Great. How about you, John?
You can find me at John Picozzi on all the major social networks. And you can find out about Oomph and our new training offering at oomphinc.com/training.
Looking forward to learning more about that. I'm Stephen Cross. You can find me on Twitter at Stephen Cross with a PH. Take care, everybody.
See you guys next week.
Have a good one.
Bye. All right. Thank you, guys. My wife just texted me. Chelsea Clinton is speaking at her school right now.
Really?
Yeah. I guess she wrote a book for kids.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think she did.
So I don't know who put that.
Darn
user
it.
one link.
I forgot. I was going to do an update on the Drupal 8 user 1 thing.
So you put that in. So I'm not sure if that's Drupal 8 though. I know it was updated last year, but
it's literally in the Drupal 8 user guide.
Okay, so I didn't know if I didn't realize. I just saw chapter 7 because I found that same thing and it said 7.2. So I didn't know if it was.
I feel you. That's why
7.
I looked at it like 6 times. I was like, I don't understand this.
Do you want to talk about it now and have me edit?
It's up to you if you feel like editing back in.
I can.
All right. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that.
I could append it to the end of the show too.
You can. All right. So
John, you found a little bit about user 1 while we're on the show here. What'd you find?
I did. So user 1 in Drupal 8 does have special permissions.
Still,
there will
vindication.
be a link. There will be a link in the show notes to the Drupal 8 user guide page that talks about user 1. It does say, it has a couple of permissions. Let me see if I can find something. Permission to do all actions on the site, including view and editing all content, editing any user account, changing site configuration, installing and uninstalling modules, running the update script. Because of this level of permission, some people refer to this account as the root user, similar to the root user account you may find in Linux and other operating systems. So user 1 still does have very special permissions, and there are some tips and tricks on how you should manage that user account.
I just remember too why I knew that was still the case, and it's because of paragraphs. Because every time I create a new paragraph for a client. I create it, I test it, I theme it, looks good. I push it up to the test environment.
And no one can see it.
Okay. I can't see it.
Yeah.
And then I have to go check, speaking of permissions, I have to
but
check 75 boxes.
But here's part of the problem there too, right? Is there's a lesson that user one is the first user that's created that gets when you build the site. You really should never use that, right? You should really, for everything, you should be able to create a new user with administrative account privileges.
That's something
but
that
you're never looking and testing stuff as user one, because I've run into that many times, not in 8, but in 7. It would always come back and bite me.
It's much less of an issue in 8, but it's still an issue with paragraphs.
And that's something we've actually started doing, is we've actually started blocking user one, and setting up individual user accounts per person to be able to kind of control who can see what and do what. I will also note here, Nick mentioned this before we started recording this segment. The numbering on this article does say 7.2, but that's because it's chapter 7, section 2. So don't be confused and think that the link in the show notes is wrong and it's referring to Drupal 7.
Oops.
We'll just edit that part out.
Yeah. Okay. I just need to make a note here so I can remember to edit this later. So this is 239. And section to the end. All right, great. All right, guys. So I haven't updated the calendar yet, but I'm in DC, so we have to record on Friday. I guess 1 o'clock's good.
Yep.
Yeah, it works for me.
I already moved it on my calendar. So.
All right. Okay.
So you can't go to Paris, but DC.
Well, it's work, right? Do I care if things are closed in DC next week?
I'm curious about the people behind the CDC website. I imagine that page is getting refreshed.
So you know my colleague that was on the show, Magella, a few weeks back. She used to work on the CDC website before she came to the ATF.
So it is
there
Drupal,
for like 5 years.
Is it Drupal? Or okay.
And right now she's breathing a sigh of relief because she does not work for the CDC anymore. She's like,
that page has disappeared. Like the entire page has disappeared a couple times.
Yeah.
Like they just delete the whole page for 2 hours, and they've removed information.
Makes me wonder what is it built with.
I couldn't find. I
don't know if they switched it since she's been there, but it was some totally obscure CMS system that I never heard of before.
Their meta tags are prefixed with CDC, which was interesting because I was looking at that. I was trying to figure out what they were.
Wappleizer says it's jQuery, Bootstrap, and then it has Google Analytics and Site Catalyst, but that doesn't really tell me what it's built in.
I'm getting the answer right now. I can't. It's like at the tip of my tongue. All right.
At CDC Go.
I'll be interested to see if you guys ever heard of this system.
Template package?
Nope, that's not it.
No. That's interesting. Content IE equals edge. Why is that meta tag in there? Theme saying
they want to support edge.
4C? Oh no, that's a JavaScript library.
Global universal meta tag.
I don't know. Like I said, I started using the Johns Hopkins tracker because it's just so much more accurate and updated.
Oh, she says that it was used when she was there. It was using something called Percussion.
Oh, I'm familiar with Percussion.
But she says it's since moved to WordPress.
Yeah. Okay.
Does that look like a word? I mean, you can usually tell a typical WordPress structure.
So
it doesn't look like it.
It depends.
I'm not going to go to the WP-login page on a government site to see if it's WordPress. That's my number one way to find out if it is.
You can usually tell by the folder structure.
So like Wappleizer should be able to say if it's WordPress or not. So I don't know if that's obscured by something that they're doing, but I mean, I don't know. It looks like it could be WordPress.
Somebody just sent me a website in Drupal. Like somebody might need some help recovering some stuff.
It's coming through the Akamai network. I can tell you that.
It's a Drupal website, but they blocked the user/login, like redirected it. They removed all the Drupal headers that say that it's a Drupal site. Like I haven't done that in so many years. It doesn't actually.
It's probably a smart thing to do. I don't know.
I don't know about that. It's obscurity isn't security. It just makes it harder for people to recover when.
I don't know, but I think if there's like a hacker that's interested in going after Drupal sites, it might make it,
I'm going to
you don't
update
fall
all my
onto their
Drupal
list.
sites to say they're Drupal 3 and have it report back to.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
That's what we're
update the
spending
update
time on
module.
now.
I'm gonna put in a patch that randomly chooses a number between 1 and 5.
And
All of a sudden, there's gonna be 80,000 Drupal 2 sites.
at that point, and now it's time to go.
Oh, all right. I got to get back to work.
I'm gonna go eat lunch.
Yeah, me too.
All right.
Catch
See you
you
guys.
later.
All right. Bye.
Thanks. See you later.